Good evening, Detroit Lakes. This is the Vikings Territory Breakdown. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of the UFDA Sports Network with sites like VikingsTerritory.com, PurplePTSD.com, TheDraftTeam.com, FranchiseTag.com, MiniIce.com, and a couple other new sites coming up, including a UFDA Sports site/app that's coming in May, and one site that we're actually going to announce for the first time later in the show. So, unfortunately, you're going to have to listen to me drone on for a while before you get to the juicy stuff. I'm joined by Mr. Joe Olberly. Per usual, how are you doing, man?
Well, I just got back from the dentist after seeing him for the first time in a year.
Ooh.
So if I'm talking strangely, it's because I have all this more room in my mouth for the ton of plaque that's out of it. And if I'm crabbier than usual, it's because I hate the dentist. Sorry.
So it seems like we've had a little bit of a following growing from this show, and we have a lot of people week to week making comments, and I'd be remiss if I didn't try to draw a through line between the topic of what you were doing last week, what we interrupted you doing, which was making your own maple syrup in your yard. A week later, you're at the dentist. I'm pretty sure there's a correlation, or at least causation.
I don't think so. Because, I just haven't gone to the dentist for a year because of COVID. And I have a place that builds up plaque in my teeth. And when I walked in, I asked the hygienist, "Did you bring your jackhammer?"
I also haven't been to the dentist for a decade because of COVID. I guess I'll just use that excuse. I'm terrified of the dentist.
To all the Detroit Lakes folks who are fans of Adam Thielen, who was actually thinking about getting into dentistry sales before he became a Viking.
Oh.
So I hope I not offended anybody in that regard.
Didn't the Vikings have a quarterback in the 70s who ended up being an orthodontist?
Yes. No.
Gary Quazzo?
Quazzo was an orthodontist. Yes. No, I was going to say Fred Cox, but he just invented the Nerf ball. So, no, you're right. One of them, one of the two. You're right. One of those two guys was a teeth. That's for sure. Good memory.
Well, Dad always kind of brought that up as a way to explain the rough years being a Vikings fan back in the day. He was like, we literally had a quarterback who retired to become an orthodontist, which I was just like, that
was
that
Quazzo.
makes sense. We are also joined for the first time. I'm very excited to announce one of our newer writers, I guess, of the last crop that we brought in, but he's ingratiated himself into being one of the most vital aspects of what we do from a written perspective, from a vision of the future perspective. A really great guy, Mr. Josh FREY, who is a senior writer for VikingsTerritory.com, PTSD.com, and also TheDraftTeam.com. He'll be heading up his own site within the next, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks, which is going to be a site that we talk about. Again, I keep teasing everybody. It's tantalizing. We'll talk about a little bit, but first I wanted to just introduce you and say, what's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, doing good. That was quite the intro there.
Yeah, no pressure, man.
Yeah, no, I gotta live up to it now.
We had Kirby on the show last week to talk about the site that he's the managing editor of, and at this point you're basically co-managing editor of as well, the workhorse behind TheDraftTeam.com. And I feel like there's been a few things that have really turned the draft on its head, both across the league and in terms of the Vikings' position at 14. There's the trades that happened about 10 days ago, and then this week, obviously, the news that Jeff Gladney turned himself into Dallas County Police for third-degree felony family assault, which, I wrote a couple articles about it, and it always feels sort of gross to be like, instant reaction as to how his, alleged pretty brutal assault on his girlfriend affects the draft, and I didn't want to all of a sudden turn that into me basically complaining about Zimmer and drafting corners instantly, because I felt like people are going to be like, man, you really really that came up quick. But part of what we do, is obviously analyze these sort of things on multiple levels, on the personal level, and then also from a team impact perspective. And so I mean, I know that a lot of people were saying that with Patrick Peterson coming in, Gladney was maybe the fourth receiver on the depth chart, that Dantzler outshined him. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I mean, Patrick Peterson obviously is a very accomplished corner, or especially was when he first came into the league. But I can't imagine. We don't know what was going to happen at training camp. We don't know how much Zimmer trusts Gladney, or if they wanted Peterson to really be the coach on the field, or they're going to transition to Gladney being the starter by the end of the season because he's a first-round pick, so on and so forth. But I just wanted to just get your take on the situation, Joe. First and foremost, and then we can kind of also talk about the impact you think it has on the roster, and then I'll see what Mr. Frey thinks of the draft impact.
Well, it's a bad deal. No two ways around it. It's I had forgotten that he was a first round pick. Oh, man, I guess at this point I've moved on. For what it's worth, because if you've seen or read or heard anything about what he's allegedly accused of doing, or accused of allegedly doing, it's pretty bad. And, show's over as far as I'm concerned about him. I mean, you got to wait till it all plays out and this all comes forward that it's true. And he did turn himself in. So he obviously probably feels some kind of culpability here, but I'm not sure he will play in the league again if such a thing is true. I mean, he'll certainly get disciplined by the Vikings or cut or what have you, and that should probably be forthcoming after they do their due diligence to ferret out what they can about the incident. But the NFL is not going to look kindly on him, and they probably might not let him play either. So it's a shame for him. It's a shame certainly for the victim in the steal, and certainly feel bad for her. The heart goes out to her and her family and everything that's going on. But boy, it's bad news, and I don't know that I don't want to see him back. If this is all true and it's litigated out that way.
Yeah, as we've seen, even if he gets a plea bargain as a first-time offender, because I know it's like a 2 to 10 year prison sentence, but he's probably not going to get that. He'll probably plead and get something, or who knows, maybe it'll get thrown out for some strange reason. I don't think that'll happen, but the NFL has shown that it kind of operates separately from the judicial system. I mean, 10 years ago,
right.
They were in federal court in Minneapolis a lot for kind of operating as their own country, essentially. But yeah, I think he's essentially played his last down, and it's going to go down as one of the most, and again, this is gross to say, but it's a disastrous thing for the Vikings, a first-round pick. It reminds me a little bit of Demetrius Underwood, just differently. Having a high pick like that, you kind of flame out like that. I mean, it's astounding. I'm still kind of getting my head around it.
It's a bad deal, and as far as I'm concerned, the less time spent on it, the better, because the next thing is to move on and figure out how it impacts the team, move on, because this guy's got all kinds of issues now to deal with, and he's basically, football shouldn't even be on his radar or in his mind for a while. He's got other things. Move on, move away, Vikings. We've had a history of bad things happen on this team and in this league, and they've seemed to lessen a little bit, but the fact that they still exist, they're going to happen in every walk of life. But we need less of this, not for it to
Isn't
continue.
it a little strange though that I've bemoaned what I consider, I mean, not so much last year because of losing both Rhodes, Waynes, and Mackenzie Alexander, but it seems like they overinvest in the corner position. Mike Hughes, for example. First-round pick, when you have 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick already playing, you get another first-round pick. Mike Hughes, he's hurt. Then it's like, well, that kind of made sense. And now the Patrick Peterson thing, obviously Cameron Dantzler becomes increasingly important. His improvement last year became big.
Say
what?
Say it. Zimmer's a genius. Say it. I want to hear you say it.
Maybe an evil genius. Is he foreseeing these weird things happening? It's just it's very serendipitous in a strange way, and so I mean, I guess the main question then, like you said, Joe, is the impact on the team. And, some people were already kind of kicking around the idea that the Vikings were going to draft a corner, maybe not in the first round, even though Kyle Jowdry, who we work with from Vikings Gazette, wrote an article about that like 2 weeks ago. But, Josh, what do you think in terms of the draft for the Vikings? Does this really massively alter their day one or day two agenda, in your opinion?
I really don't think so. I mean, you brought in Mackenzie Alexander and Patrick Peterson for a reason, and it's because the cornerback position wasn't good enough in 2020. And I feel like with adding those two, even with Gladney gone, I feel like there's enough depth in that position now that they really don't need to worry about it as much as they do like offensive line, defensive end, or other positions that majorly need an increase.
I mean, I agree with you.
I'm sorry, Joe. I would just agree that if they go to draft a cornerback in lieu of this news, that would be a horrendous mistake. They've got you can find somebody on the scrap heap to backfill at the other end of this rather than worry about your frontline starters and try to get somebody in the draft. You have an offensive line to take care of, and I know you have on the agenda about drafting a wide receiver, and I'm going to come through the computer and scream and yell. And probably
what have I said, man?
Somebody else if they do that, but no, I'd really like to see them draft an offensive lineman. Hopefully that's what they do. But
first of all, I will say in terms of the wide receiver thing, which I've made very clear is my position of interest above all else. I'm like the zipper of wide receivers, or I would say somehow a worse Matt Millen in that regard. That what I kind of alluded to last week and in some of my articles in the last couple of weeks is when it comes to the draft and the argument of best player available versus position of need, which I think changes from year to year and from team to team, obviously. You have to look at the draft for the Vikings in terms of if this player pans out that they take, what is the potential positive impact of that? And if you go position by position, as Josh alluded to and as Joe and I have talked about since, we've been almost podcasting together for 4 years, I realized this week, because I was going through and looking at some of the old shows. And we've talked about this almost every single week for that entire period. And so it's hard to make the argument that the offensive line still isn't the position group that needs the most grease, is the squeakiest wheel. I agree with you, Joe. I think that if as I alluded to a couple minutes ago, Zimmer is taking corners when he really didn't have a reason to. So it just scares me that he has this reason now. But I think there's
Joe. I just wrote something down. I got to make sure I got it right before I go on. I'm the Zimmer of wide receivers. Okay, I've got that. That's
okay.
What you said.
I'm so mad you don't know how to create sound bites and then use them against me almost instantly.
J-fan that could always go into, but anyway. I know your point. You're making a good point.
It does feel like the Vikings media, and I'm not taking credit for it, even though I have in my articles tongue-in-cheek twice just because I know it bothers people, that Vikings media is almost unanimously pushing for once, just deal with the offensive line. Honestly, like it's old at this point, and obviously there's some more question marks on the offensive line than there was even last year. So, Mr. Frey, if I were to put a gun to your head, the gun to the head round of each show happens at this point. If the Vikings were to stay at 14, which we'll get into in a second as well, what do you think they're going to do from a position standpoint? What do you not what you hope they'll do or what you think they should do, but what do you think they are going to do if you had to choose right now today?
So the way that things are panning out now, with all the trades and everything that have gone down in the past week and the new reports that we have, I really think they're going to lean towards the defensive end at this point. I think somebody like Gregory Rousseau or Kwity Paye is going to fall to that spot, and I think they're going to jump on it while they have the chance. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but I do think that's what they're going to do.
That's what Kirby said last week, wasn't it, Joe?
Yeah, it was.
Damn
And
it.
you know,
I don't want that.
either I don't either. And it's hard because we don't really know what's going on with Danielle Hunter either. And that obviously has like a really huge impact on what happens there. But if you, who do you like of that group? A lot of people are in Vikings beat teams are really hyping up Kwity Paye from Michigan, which I'm not going to be too mad at for reasons that I don't even need to explain at this point. A lot of people are hyping up the Penn State guy, who's just like a physical specimen. Apparently, I think he runs like a 4.340, and he's a defensive end. It's like he's faster than
Right, yeah.
Adam Thielen. What is that about? Phillips, so on and so forth. But who's your favorite of that group?
So I think me and Kirby stand pretty much in the same spot on this one. I think Kwity Paye and Gregory Rousseau are heads and shoulders above the rest of the group in that in the defensive end area. I think the less risky choice at 14 would be Kwity Paye, just because I think he's more polished at this point.
Yeah.
But I think Gregory Rousseau might have a higher ceiling just because he's still super raw. He only really has one full year of football under him. And I mean, he's a physical freak. Like, he doesn't really have the greatest technique yet, but he just gets by offensive linemen just because he's so powerful, he's so fast, and they just can't stay in front of him. So I think if they're going to go with the guy that has a better ceiling, I think it's Rousseau.
Okay. Josh, if there's, it all depends on the way the draft falls. What the Vikings do always, that always has an effect on it. And I'm sure you're saying, everything stands pat now, but now we see that the Atlanta Falcons want to trade the 4th pick, and we saw that the other trade this week for quarterback with the Jets trading away Darnold. If all of a sudden a bunch of these teams take these quarterbacks up front, that might kick one of these left tackles down there to 14. Do the Vikings then? Are they forced to take it? Don't you think they should? Or I think they should, but that doesn't mean they would. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Right. I mean, at this point, it seems like the top 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks at least. So the draft essentially starts at 4. I don't see any world where Penei Sewell falls that far. But I think there's a slight chance that Rashawn Slater does. And if he's there, I would jump on that. I mean, I don't trust. I mean, Kirk Cousins, Iron Man, but he takes one bad hit, and we're putting in somebody like Sean Mannion, and you don't want to have that be your starting quarterback for half the season and just hope that he's good enough.
He's made of iron. That's why he moves so slowly in the pocket.
So it seems like there's a debate with Slater whether or not he's a pure tackle from an NFL standpoint. I remember seeing an article on like USA Today like a month ago that was like, if you think he's not a tackle, you're wrong. Northwestern. The crux of my Big Ten, and Josh, you and I really won't. I won't punish you for this because I can't even get my own family to listen to my podcast. But I bring up the Big Ten every week, and I've written this article. It's like a marketing manifesto of why I think Big Ten players in certain positions are better pros. Offensive line is one of them because they have offensive or NFL style offensive linemen still. Like Wisconsin has 5 guys each year that are going to get picked before the 5th or 6th round. But when it comes to a guy like Slater or other guys, especially quarterbacks, Northwestern is obviously a really hard school to get into from an academic standpoint. And it just, to me, it implies an extra level of dedication that you actually have these really hard academic standards that you have to apply to, and also play football basically full time. So I like it. I like that from that standpoint. I just will say that I've heard from former offensive linemen that played under Zimmer that Zimmer does not like smart offensive linemen. He
What?
labels. One day I will.
Ryan O'Neal.
I'm just telling you that my source basically said every time that he would point out what the defense was doing in practice, Zimmer would freak out and be like, "No, reset. Pretend you don't know what they're doing," even though it was like a scrimmage. And then after that, this guy was labeled as a smart guy, and then he was no longer on the team. So I'm sure sleuths can figure out who that is. But I have that in the back of my mind with Slater.
I don't think that's why. I don't think that's why he was no longer on the team, because he was too smart. No, it's just my opinion, but my goodness, come on, that's not right.
There's I think there's something comes with that people might overlook who have that label, that maybe they're too independent thinkers or free thinkers, and maybe they don't see that they're maybe they don't. Well, I mean, there's also, if you look at some of the people I've interacted with and interviewed, you could make an argument for multiple guys. I would say there's one also that I think went to a really good school that was around that time as well. Either way,
So,
I don't think that was the sole issue, but I do think that's part of it. I think. I don't know. It's very. I mean, we also heard from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel guy, the Go Long TD guy, that Zimmer would a lot of the beef between him and DeFilippo was Zimmer getting mad that they were running our own practice and beating his defense, and that he cared more about winning in practice with his defense than actually what winning on the offense meant long term or outside of that practice. That was one of the main cruxes of that argument. He would kind of sabotage the offense.
He should be fired.
I completely agree with you. I mean, if you read that article, which is very well sourced, he literally would tell the defense what the offense was doing, so his defense would win in practice,
right.
And then he, basically.
That's fine. I understand that, and that's a legitimate thing you can do at practice. I mean, if they're trying to learn, and you help them out and say, so at least they know what they're supposed to do, perhaps. But you can't go out there and tell them during the game. So I mean, ultimately, you can't do that. And if he's making decisions on his personnel based on the fact that the offense is beating his defense, then he's a child and he should be fired.
Yeah, I think I would
have said that about Zimmer before.
I would highly suggest that people just go to Google, type in Vikings territory, and write things are bad. Report things are bad in Zimmerland. Read that article, which is it has the link to the article that I'm talking about. People both on and off the record, from a credentialed journalist from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, who I talked to, and then I also had to check his sources to make sure that he, wasn't just making it out of whole cloth, and I did my due diligence in that regard. It was very interesting. I think that people will look at things a little bit differently and maybe stop emailing me at 2 a.m. When I talk about Zimmer. Just a dream of mine. But no, getting back to the original question, if Josh is still there.
Sorry.
No, it's totally my fault, man. It's not you. I guess the better way to ask would be, I've seen Mel Kiper Jr. say that might drop to 9. The Vikings might be able to from 14 to 9. I don't see them being up, but after that, it sounds like you like Slater, and I was just interested in your thoughts on him as a player.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, he's not exactly typical tackle build, I guess. He's kind of small, 6'4", I think, like 310 pounds, which, I mean, is crazy just to say that that's a small human being. But as far as, like, his play, he's super athletic, which makes up for his lack of size. And he's really good in the pass blocking, and that's exactly what Minnesota needs at this point. Like, you lost Riley Reif. He had one of his best years last year, and you need to replace that. And I mean, he's definitely smaller, but he's a good player. Like, there's no way around it at this. Like I said, I think he's the second best tackle in this draft. I'm not sure I'd trade up to get him necessarily, because I do think that left tackle is a pretty deep position in this draft.
Yeah.
But if he's there at 14, you might as well jump on it because you need to protect Kirk Cousins this year.
And you wrote an article recently about the door basically cracking open for the Vikings to trade up for Sewell, and I would highly suggest people check that out. It's on Purple PTSD and on TheDraftTeam.com. But do you feel like he's the type of talent that is? I mean, we've seen some of the draft capital you have to give up to move up. I mean, the Vikings perhaps in this scenario wouldn't have to move up, to 3 or whatever, and give up multiple firsts and a third or whatever. But do you think he's the type of talent at left tackle that you should trade up for? Let's say from the 7 to 9 range. Do you think he's a plug and play sort of what the Vikings thought Matt Khalil was going to be, like your answer for the next decade?
I think he's about as sure a thing as you're going to get at left tackle going into the draft. He's got the perfect size to be an NFL tackle. He's super athletic. His competitiveness is through the roof. The only issue is like with his run blocking. Sometimes it's a little shaky, but I mean that's not a huge issue at left tackle. And yeah, I think he's a guy that you can plug in on day one and tell him, hey, go stop this number one defensive end on the opposing team, and he's going to do it for you.
Yeah, that would be a home run pick. Let's just hope that he didn't do too well in the Wonderlic. Man, when it comes to guards, though, I think before the Riley Reef thing came out, I was really the news of him, obviously, not being on the team anymore. I was really bullish on Wyatt Davis from Ohio State for glaringly obvious bias reasons, but also because I feel like he's another one of those sort of plug and play guys. Whether or not the Vikings would justify using a first or maybe a second based on his injury on a guard, I think remains to be seen. I think they are allergic to drafting guards really before the fourth round. I don't think they've done that under Zimmer.
Well, they'd have to trade up to get a second because they don't have a second right now. But
they could trade down, I guess, and then acquire a second if they think whatever they're doing is that class is deep enough. But assuming they do that, they also don't like to draft guards who've actually played guard more. Who do you like as some of the guards coming out in the draft, and what do you think where do you think they'll fall, and what do you think the Vikings might do in that regard?
Yeah, so this is the move that I've wanted Minnesota to do basically since the season ended. I think the move is maybe trade down a few spots, pick up some more draft assets, maybe a second rounder, and you pick up Elijah Vera Tucker. I like Wyatt Davis a lot, but I think Vera Tucker is a little bit better, and I just like his versatility more because he played both left tackle and guard at USC, and I think having the ability to kick him out to left tackle if you need to, if God forbid an injury happens or something, I think that's a really good security blanket for Minnesota to have. And I just think Ezra Cleveland needs to play left tackle next year. I think that's something that I think moving him out to left tackle I think that's honestly the answer if you don't get Penei Sale or Rashawn Slater, because he was really good at Boise State. Obviously wasn't super impressive at guard this year for Minnesota. He's still ranked pretty highly in PFF among rookies, if I remember correctly, but it wasn't anything
I think
spectacular.
It was like he did okay to good in the run game, like a ton of pressures.
Yeah, but how's he done in the Wonderlic? I mean, is he
as far as I have another source that says Zimmer doesn't want his players to know how to read. So, but I think that you make a good point about Cleveland. That I've seen some articles from people that know a lot more about this than I do. That he's not physically or prototypically a guard with how just his length. And he's not. Guards are typically more stout and kind of not as top heavy.
They're more compact.
So I like that move because I also think it opens up a lot more possibilities. What terrifies me about this draft and especially about the Vikings is the fact that there's a strong argument, obviously, that they have 3 question marks right now on the line, but there's also the 4th question mark, which is Bradbury kind of a bust, or should we just? I mean, obviously they're going to be more patient with him, but he hasn't played very well. But then it's hard to say how well he would do if he maybe had, not 2 awful guards playing on either side of him.
Exactly.
And so I do like that move with Cleveland. Obviously he didn't play against like the most premier talent at Boise State, but I think that makes sense. What do you think about moving Brian O'Neill to left tackle and putting Cleveland at right tackle?
That I wouldn't be opposed to that either. I haven't seen either one of them play. Like, I haven't seen O'Neill play at left tackle, and I haven't seen Cleveland play at right tackle before. So that is a little bit of a question mark for me, but I don't think it's too much of an issue. I think it could work, hypothetically.
Yeah. I worry about that just because it's like all of a sudden weakening 2 positions if they're both playing out of position, at least in the short term. Brian O'Neill would have to show that he's not got all his eggs in his basket, or whatever cliche you want to say, for being too smart to put out there. But I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, I know, but I also look at it like this. Brian O'Neill has been the one bright spot on the offensive line, arguably, these last couple of years. Riley Reiff, obviously, like you mentioned, had a good year last year. And so maybe the logic there is that switching sides and bringing what he's done on the right side to the left side makes more sense than Ezra Cleveland, who would just be a kind of a big question mark and has a less of a jump from Boise State / playing right guard to right tackle. There was some talk of that months ago. I honestly don't see that happening.
Yeah. I can say about Brian is and you heard me say this many times on the show, Joe. I interviewed him when he was a rookie, and I saw something in him, and I knew he was a pretty sharp individual, and he knew what was up, and he had this determination about him that I think maybe in time he could probably play whatever position you put him in. He start at tight end and move out to offensive tackle? Isn't that his history? And
yeah,
I thought so. Yeah, and so I don't doubt that he couldn't go over there and play left tackle, and it might be the thing to do, and it might be what they are planning to do. But on paper and right out of the gate, it's going to be an adjustment for 2 people at 2 new positions when you already have questions on the offensive line. And if you don't bolster it with somebody in the first round, you're really going to have problems. And so I would probably hate to see it, but it's a possibility if they don't get who they want, if they draft a quarterback or a wide receiver with their first pick, and then they're forced to do something like this. Well, that may be what we're left with.
Yeah, I'm a little. I don't know. It's hard because I feel like I just worry about having 2 question marks at the guard position. With obviously, I think they'd roll with Cleveland there for a while anyway, but they just have never shown a propensity to want to really use anything above like I said, the 4th round on a guard, or they get a guy who is maybe a tackle and they try to convert him to guard at some point. That hasn't obviously panned out. But it's something that again earlier, like I said, I think that if they can even muster a mediocre pass blocking unit, the sky really is the limit for this offense. I mean, if this offense is borderline elite, I think they're a little dink and donkey by design. At least they were last year, to keep the opposing quarterbacks on the sidelines for as long as possible because of some of the limitations we discussed earlier. But I feel like the one positive of free agency and the investment, the almost pure investment in the defense, is that they shored up the middle of the defensive line, which was outside of the corner play, especially earlier in the season, the Achilles on this defense. They have a true nose tackle, and all they have these 2 beefy dudes in the middle. The defense even with what happened with Gladney, the defense looks a lot more it has a lot less question marks position by position than the offensive line does, and so let's just hope that's what happens. I have zero faith though that it will. I'm so gun shy at this point about these things that it does terrify me a little bit. You wrote an article recently too, Josh, about the wide receiver 3 position and that the Vikings could maybe find somebody through trade. People have talked about maybe bringing Larry Fitzgerald home to Minneapolis for like one last year as a free agent. But I've also seen mocks where people say that, if Smith from Alabama falls to 14, the Vikings could take him, which I think would not happen, but would be kind of cool. From a Madden perspective, just having those 3 receivers line up next to each other would be like, what? But what do you think about the wide receiver 3 position? Not just draft-wise, but in terms of...
sacked.
What?
Until Cousins gets sacked.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's the thing. Yeah, like it's fun to think about these great wide receivers lining up next to each other, but I kind of just go back to the situation that Cincinnati is in. Like they could pick a really good receiver at 5, or they could draft Penei Sewell and shore up their offensive line for the next 10 years and make sure that Joe Burrow doesn't get hurt again. I think that's the way to go for them. I think that's the way to go for the Vikings. Like you said, it might not pan out where Minnesota drafts a tackle. They might do something crazy and draft a cornerback or something, but I still don't think wide receiver is the way that they should go, like even if one of these really good ones falls to them.
God, that statement that he just made to solidify their offensive line for the next 10 years. It gave me goosebumps. I mean, that's never Joe, since we've been doing this or before, we've never seen that. Any attempt at solidifying this offensive line for the next 10 years. How awesome would that be for the Vikings?
Yeah, it almost sounds unattainable.
Yeah.
I think 7 of the 8 NFC or 6 of the 7 NFC playoff teams this last year were had lines that were ranked by PFF in the top 8. So it's obviously important. It's a passing league. Creating a clean pocket is great. I mean, I do think that Cousins has done a lot considering they've had a near 27 to 29th ranked line from a pass protection standpoint. Big Ten. I also brain farts. I completely forgot that Larry Fitzgerald retired recently. I talked about this on Sandsville Show a couple weeks ago, and I just thought I just want to own that jersey. You know what I mean?
That would be a good one, yeah.
I remember when Favre came here, I was like, honestly, if they go 2-14, beat the Packers twice, and I can rock a purple Favre jersey for the rest of my life and piss off people in Wisconsin whenever I have to go there for fireworks or whatever. That makes me happy.
Well, a Fitzgerald jersey would piss him off too because of what he did to them in the playoffs a few years back.
Yeah, oh, man, God, he would. I mean, I still think that I don't know. For the wide receiver thing, it's a lot of people are saying then they can rid themselves of Adam Thielen's contract next year or whatever. He's getting older. I don't really think. And I'm not just saying this because we're on the air in Detroit Lakes and I don't want to get tarred and feathered. I don't think his skill set really is the type that will degenerate with age like other receivers do, just because he's such a tactician and his body control and his catch radius. He runs incredible routes, so on and so forth. I think he'll be good for a long time, a la Larry Fitzgerald. But I do think they need to find somebody at the wide receiver 3 spot. BC Johnson kind of disappeared. But at the same time, I don't know. In a Kubiak offense, even if it's Kubiak and maybe he has new wrinkles, with Irv Smith Jr. emerging and being a run-first team, obviously, which will be the case next year as well, you don't really need much from your wide receiver 3 outside of somebody who can catch a first down one every 3 to 4 games. So I think it's kind of a moot point. But it's fun to talk about.
Joe, I just looked up. Larry Fitzgerald has not retired yet. He's expected to retire. Sounds a little Farvian to me. Huh?
Oh.
Pieces are going to be in place. Here we go.
maybe it's a bargaining chip. I don't know. I don't know how any of this stuff works, to be completely honest with you.
He's expected to retire though, and he will, I'm sure. So,
God, it would have been a great jersey. To hang on the wall. Again, it just maybe I'll just order one anyway and pretend like I live in an alternate reality. Josh, you mentioned what a lot of people have said. Potentially the draft could start at 4, with the first 3 picks being quarterbacks, and then there's been some scenarios where it could be the first 4 to 5 picks could be quarterbacks. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is the guy. Beyond that, though, there's been some ranking changes with pro days and people. It's like the Democrat Republican conventions. There's always like a bump in polls right afterwards, and after a pro day with these, especially these COVID pro days, and what we see online, the hype for a guy like Zach Wilson goes up, or other guys too. How would you rank the quarterbacks after Trevor Lawrence? Which is a similar question I posed to Kirby, so I'm interested in your take on it.
Yeah, so obviously Trevor Lawrence is number 1, but then I think Justin Fields is probably number 2. I think he's got all the weapons that you need at the quarterback position to fit in this modern NFL. He's got a great arm. He showed that at his pro day. And then he's also just super athletic. He knows when to run. His inner clock is really great. And I get the stigma behind Ohio State quarterbacks
I
now.
wanted to ask you that, man. I mean, why do you think that happens? It goes against completely what I said a couple minutes ago with my manifesto, but it's a thing, and I wonder, why that is. Is it the style of offense? Is it that they've had some run first guys? I mean, Cardale Jones had a big arm. I thought maybe he would do better, or buck that trend.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have had some really good talent at both running back and wide receiver throughout the years, so that probably plays a part in it. And I mean, Urban Meyer was just a really good coach when he was there too. So I mean, he can make guys successful, and I think he's going to do that in Jacksonville as well. So I think that plays a role. But Justin Fields he feels like a different kind of guy than the other guys. His accuracy is a lot better than like a JT Barrett or a Dwayne Haskins ever was. And he just knows how to make winning plays, and he showed that throughout his time at Ohio State. And yeah, I just feel like he's a different kind of player.
Yeah, I like him too, but again, bias.
Bias.
I can't hide
why
it.
don't you just put that as an pin that agenda item? Joe's Big Ten bias for each week.
It should be a segment each week where it already is unofficially, right?
I will join 10 minutes or 15 minutes after the show starts, so you can get it out of here.
There you go.
In other Big Ten news, I wanted to touch on something you talked about earlier, Joe. The Jets trade with the Panthers, sending Darnold there. Teddy Bridgewater being authorized to talk to other teams with his agent for a trade. Some people are saying he might end up in New England, or that he should end up in New England. At least some of the Patriots media is saying that. What do you think is genuinely next for him, Joe and Josh? I mean, do you think that maybe he should look for Water? I mean, do you think he should look for a backup role? Do you think he's going to become a franchise guy, or he has that potential still?
Well, I saw a report earlier today that the Broncos are interested, or maybe not that they're interested, but that's a really logical landing spot for him now. And I know you talked about the Patriots. There was some of that. I don't know that he can. I don't know. He's not really proven himself the starter, because the Saints didn't make him the starter. The Panthers, have moved on from him. I don't know if it's skill or the injury or if he doesn't have what everybody's looking for in a starter. But I don't know if he'll ever get back to that realm. If I was him, I was, I'm in my mind, I'm reading all the stuff about Teddy, and I'm doing what a lot of Minnesotans are doing. Is just, gosh, come back here and take Sean Mannion's place and just sit tight. Sooner or later, Cousins is going to get hit from this offensive line, and we'll need you. But if you put the gun to my head in this segment, I would say no. I don't think he'll be a big time starter anyway. Maybe a place like the Broncos he could, because they still got, they're still not sold on, his name's Drew Lock, right? Is their quarterback, and so I would say I don't think so, but I hope he does, but I don't know that it'll ever pan out like it should have when he was here.
Do you know what really solidified my, I don't want to say opposition to Bridgewater when he was here, but I will say that there were a few really galvanizing moments when Purple PTSD was
not from the Big Ten.
Partially.
Go ahead.
That I remember very vividly back when Purple PTSD was before I ended up purchasing Vikings Territory, and Purple PTSD was kind of like just a glorified Facebook posting wall for me, where I would just shout things into the ether and then randomly post them on Reddit, get yelled at, and then get happy that I got 500 clicks from it. Back at the time, Vikings Reddit and Vikings social media fandom really, and I get where it came from, especially for people of my age, being 36, they really wanted a young quarterback that the Vikings both drafted and developed that was a franchise quarterback. Outside of really Dante Culpepper, we've had just a lot of neo has-been type guys that come in when they're about to retire, a little bit of glory, and then they devastate us in the playoffs, right?
We all want right.
There was a lot of emotional investment there. I got it, and so they really quickly labeled not only Teddy the solution, but that he was an elite quarterback. And my whole take on it was pump brakes. He has potential, but I don't think he's there yet. But when I transitioned to saying I don't know if he's the guy, to be honest with you, was when we, Joe, had Tommy Kramer on our original podcast out at the Mermaid, and he went into a really specific breakdown of Teddy's mechanics. And I know he worked on improving them, but he had a little bit of a sidearm throw. And so when Mike Wallace kind of shaded him on the way out, there were times that Mike Wallace was 5 yards beyond any defender, wide open. And Teddy would overthrow him because he was kind of throwing not like Vince Young sidearms, but he wasn't getting enough air under the ball. He's throwing all these line drives down the field. He just couldn't make all the throws on the field. He was very lethal in the last 3 minutes of some games. I remember Zimmer saying we wish he'd play the first 57 minutes like he does the last 3. I saw him working on his mechanics the last year that Mankato had training camp. I felt like he was doing that in the preseason before his injury, and maybe he reset because of that. But I just feel like, he just can't make all the throws on the field. And I looking at what the Panthers were saying about him this last season, he was really hesitant, especially in the red zone. Like his red zone efficiency was really bad. He was holding on to the ball too long, and that maybe was an injury related thing. But I just don't really think he's capable of making all the throws on the field. That's obviously
you don't
job
see
number 1.
Zimmer. You don't see Zimmer, who loves him and professed it many times. You don't see him clamoring to get him back either. So
yeah, and I think that it's just an interesting dichotomy to me, because then we have Cousins, who's I've said this multiple times. If you just replaced Cousins with Teddy and gave the exact same stats, same regular season record, Teddy would be governor of the state of Minnesota. It's just we finally got kind of what we wanted to. We didn't draft Cousins, but he was not 40. It's just very strange to me. But yeah, Josh, I mean, where are you at on the whole Teddy as a starter thing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we're past the point of saying that he's going to be one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league. I think best case scenario for him is honestly, 2 years ago in New Orleans, those 6 games where you replaced Drew Brees and went 6-0, that was the perfect situation for him. He had a great defense, he had a great coach, he had a great offensive line. Unfortunately, a lot of teams that are going to be looking for a quarterback at this point don't really have those. So I don't really think there's going to be a place that he goes to where he's going to be an instant difference maker.
Yeah. You're good,
Josh,
man.
let me ask you a question.
Almost too good.
I would not to get off Teddy real quickly, but Joe and I said our piece, I think. But what do you think of Cousins? And this is not to shade Joe in any way. And this question does not go to Joe because we already know the answer. But I was talking to someone the other day, and that's what they said. Why does everybody hate Cousins? And I started explaining a few things. I think part of it is his personality. We've been on his show a little bit. He got the contract, and he's a skittish in the pocket. And I said I personally feel that I don't think he'll ever be able to believe until I see it that he's going to get us Vikings over the hump and win a championship, just because of what I have seen from him. Because ultimately I think that's what it takes to win a championship. Is it's someone who can go above and beyond when the chips are up against you at the most. I mean, even saw Patrick Mahomes couldn't do it last year, but he lost to the guy who did it more often than anybody else. Anyway, what do you think of Cousins as a quarterback, and is he the guy that the Vikings should remain attached to for the going forward?
So I'm not going to say that Cousins is one of the best QBs in the league, but I do think he's had a lot working against him in Minnesota. Last year, the O-line was not good. The pass protection, I think, per PFF ranks 28th in the league. And like Joe said, none of the NFC playoff teams were outside of the top 8. So I don't think he really had much to work with in that department. He had 2 really good receivers last year in Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, but every other playoff team that you look at, they had at least 3. It was both Thielen and Jefferson had over 500 yards last year, but there was no other receiver for Minnesota that was able to eclipse that mark. And you look at teams like Tampa Bay, Kansas City, they all had 4 or 5. So he has 2 really good targets, but they need to add another one in order to be competitive in the NFL. And that's not even taking into account the terrible defense, especially for the middle part of the season. And then the special teams was absolutely atrocious too. So there's just so much working against him that no, he's not going to be the savior that when everything falls apart around him, he's going to be able to win games. But I don't think there's too many of those guys in the league anymore that can really do that.
Yeah, and I think it's a weird standard, because then if we're looking at evaluating every quarterback in the league, or the Vikings have had, through the lens of whether or not they win a Super Bowl, I get why people look at it that way, especially with the money that he's making, even though I think it's kind of market rate at this point. Then 31 out of 32 quarterbacks each year aren't that great, or every Vikings quarterback essentially in the history has been not good enough, because we've never won a Super Bowl.
That's just right there, Joe. That's it right there. That's why people want that. They want the Super Bowl win. They want the quarterback that can win them the Super Bowl. And maybe it's a skewed lens, and it's not fair to Cousins, but that's the way this quarterback is going to forever be judged.
Yeah, I just don't think they've ever put him in the best position to do that. I also think that a lot of the people that comment on my pro-Cousins and anti-Zimmer articles kind of both fall into the same camp, and it's, well, then apply that a standard to Zimmer, who has had everything handed to him, everything a head coach could ever want, some by just luck of the draw, the new stadium, the U.S. Bank, or the TCO facility being arguably the best in the league, a great front office, the financials.
Defense handed to him, Joe, when he's joined
but
they've given him
every draft pick and every free agent that he's asked for. I mean, look at after they signed Cousins.
Pretty good defense.
After they signed Cousins, everyone was like, well, they're going to have to lose Barr or Rhodes or whatever, and then they used the remaining cap space not on an offensive lineman with Busher and Easton not coming back. They used it on Sheldon Richardson. He's had the keys handed to him to build the defense of his dreams, roster-wise, position by position. His defense was stacked, and the outcome has been getting embarrassed in the playoffs every other year. I just understand why people are so emotionally dedicated to Zimmer, but not to Cousins. And if you look at Russell Wilson's quote-unquote career year this last season. He had 5 more touchdowns than Cousins, the exact same amount of interceptions, the exact same QB rating of 105 by like 2 decimal points. The Cousins had 4,265 yards. He had 4,220. I just don't, I get that he made the playoffs, but he also wants to leave Seattle partially because he's been sacked more than any quarterback in the amount of seasons he's played. But the only outlier of those NFC teams was Seattle, and they were 16th ranked as an offensive line. He would never come here. Deshaun Watson, before all that stuff happened with him and his career being in the line, he said, "I don't want to go to Minnesota." And everyone's like, "Well, that's because they're a run-first team." Well, so the Vikings ran the ball proportionally the exact same amount as the Packers did, because Matt LaFleur is an acolyte of Gary Kubiak. And Aaron Rodgers had an MVP season. He had arguably his best season ever statistically. Those are mutually exclusive concepts.
Who are you going to give up for? Are you going to give up Justin Jefferson for an offensive lineman? You're going to go back in time and do that?
No, but I think there's other picks that you could have made. I think Mike Hughes. There were 4 plug-and-play interior offensive linemen taken between Hughes and Brian O'Neill, Will Hernandez being one of them. I would say that last year they had 15 picks, but the most ever in the modern NFL second-round draft era. They used 5 of those picks on DBs. They used 1 on an actual guard who'd played guard before. It was the 15th pick. It was also the pick before Mr. Irrelevant. Anytime they get any semblance of depth on the offensive line, they get rid of it. Pat Elflein, he didn't really obviously work out.
Tell us how you really feel, Joe. Come on.
It's maddening to me because it's like everyone. And I'll put it in the article for the show. I've heard that a lot from people. Well, who would you have taken instead of? Jefferson worked out great, but Treadwell didn't. He didn't need to make that move. Free agents that didn't come here, they invested that money elsewhere. Other teams don't have this sort of thing where it's like, well, your quarterback's getting paid a lot of money, therefore you can't have an offensive line, because other teams don't do that. Every other team has a Patrick Mahomesian contract, Dak Prescott. They make it work. The Vikings just haven't prioritized it. Free agency has shown that. Every draft has shown that.
Buckle up for it again, because the defense was bad last year, and I know they've already addressed it in free agency, but it's going to continue in the draft.
No, it's
Jimmy
a nightmare.
How you win. Yeah.
He really does.
I've seen it. I've called for it. I wanted offensive lineman. Josh, I'm sorry to bring you on the show because Joe just wants to talk offensive line every week.
I feel a little validated, though, because I'm like, wow. It was in the paper again this week. Like I don't think I'm responsible for it. Obviously, I don't think I'm responsible for most things, but I do think it's nice to be on the right side of history for once. As the guy who thought Mobo would take Thielen's spot back in 2016, I'm going to bring that up. Level my ego out a little bit. Speaking of which, obviously, I think Josh is showing on this show his acumen and why he's a rising star in the industry, in my opinion. And I think that the sky's the limit for you, man. And I'm very excited that, and a little humbled that, a couple months ago I asked you what your goals were, like what your dream gig would be in the industry, because, we have certain connections and resources for guys that I think deserve it and who have worked and have been like cool guys to be around, which is like the most important thing to me. Joe notwithstanding, you answered, that you love the NBA and that it was actually, I think if I remember correctly, like your 1A sport to the Vikings being 1B, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is not your primary focus, because it's all I focus on, and I'm bragging about being right about one glaring thing. And so we talked a lot, and in the next, I'd say, 4 weeks, we're going to be launching a new Minnesota basketball / Timberwolves / Lynx network that will be WolvesTerritory.com and MiniHoops.com that you will be the managing editor of, and you, as I told you earlier today, have a really cohesive vision for it. And I just wanted to take the time to let people know that that's coming, and also give you an opportunity to kind of let people know what the site's going to be about, what you foresee the type of content being, what we're going to kind of bring that's different to the zeitgeist there.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm really excited for it just because it'll let us kind of delve into a whole separate field of the sports universe because we've pretty much got the football thing covered at this point, but we haven't really done too much with basketball yet, and I'm really excited to finally be able to dive into something like that. Like you mentioned, basketball is my number one passion for sure. I've played it, watched it since I was a kid, and I just love the NBA. I'm really excited to get this thing started. Obviously, it's going to be Wolves focused, Wolves and Lynx focused. But I do want to delve into the more general NBA, get some thoughts out on some of the more general headlines, just because I feel like the NBA is a little bit different from the NFL in that it feels more like people are fans of it nationally instead of like specific teams. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
they root
or
for
even
specific
globally at
players.
this point.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's not a ton of people that just pick one fan base, just pick one team and root for it for their entire lives. It's more like they're with this younger generation, they're going player to player and following
Yeah,
them all over
yeah.
the country. And yeah, I'm just really excited to get this thing started. Um, Gonna be doing a lot of Wolves stuff. Gonna be doing some college stuff, a little bit of general NBA stuff, WNBA. Pretty much just covering the whole 9 yards
Yeah, man.
when we get it started. So really excited.
It's going to be awesome. And, I feel like from a business perspective, as you mentioned, man, the younger generation, I think the NBA is just perfectly suited for sort of the TikTok social media realm of, players being such big brands. And it's, five guys on a court without masks on, and highlights like that just fit with the internet age a lot more. And I think that's part of the reason that it's just exploded. On a global level, it's just a huge thing. And I don't know. I think I mentioned this before, but maybe not, Josh. But Joe actually worked for the Timberwolves for a number of years, back during the KG era, the McHale era. Um,
Oh man,
isn't that
yeah.
right,
So definitely
Joe?
have to get you on that.
I've been kind of needling him a little bit because he's got a perspective that not many people have. In that he
Well,
likes
yeah,
Kevin McHale. I'm totally kidding.
6 years back in the late 90s, and from 94 to 2000. So it was a
Oh,
lot
the
of fun.
Marbury
A lot
era
of great-
too.
Marbury, J.R. Ryder. Can't forget Isaiah. He was a
Oh
beauty.
yeah.
So,
Were you
well,
here
so,
for the Joe Smith thing?
I had just left. I
Okay.
had recently left when that went down. But yeah, I think that was after 2000. Yeah, that was a big snafu at the time. Boy, oh boy, sent him back.
Underrated
But
in how bad that was. I think it was 5 first-round picks, and then they get Nudie Ebies their first pick. I think they reduced it to 4. I had season tickets, so I haven't told you this either, Josh. Maybe I did, but I used to. The Timberwolves were very close to things for me. I was a sophomore in college during the Spreewell Cassell season, and it was I romanticized that time. I mean, I loved the Timberwolves back then. I had season tickets for up until they traded KG. To be completely honest with you, and then I remember my sales guy called me and it's like, I just can't do it, man. I can't. Like, Al Jefferson and
Dark times.
and it's if you have noticed. I get emotionally invested in teams that I love, right? And that's why I'm not a big college football guy, because the Gophers have always just been kind of blah. There's no, heartbreak there, really. I mean, it's just more like a depressing sort of Russian novel sort of heartbreak, just consistently bad. It's not like the Browns, like really great, then bad. I feel like the T-Wolves had that for a little while, especially in 03, but I got to get back into the saddle. I got to start going to games again when that's the possibility. I start covering the team or just watching the team and opining on it. If you'll have me, this was mainly just an audition for you.
Of course.
they need to not lose that pick this year. That's the biggest thing for them, boy. They need to hang on to that draft pick.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting
Protected
season.
for the first 3 picks. So
Yeah, let's hope the
Let's just
season
hope
turns
that a
out
lot of things change with the Wolves.
Yeah, man. we'll see how things go. It's a good time to jump into it, I think, yeah, because there's just a lot of moving parts. But I want people to definitely check out TheDraftTeam.com. You can find that on Facebook and Twitter at TheDraftTeam on Facebook or at _draft_team. You can find Josh on Twitter at Frayed Chicken, kind of like fried chicken. Am I pronouncing your name wrong now that I'm thinking about it?
So yeah, it is Fry. Yeah, I was going to
Okay.
mention it after the show, but it's now that you brought it up.
That's a. If I wasn't already blushing for like three other reasons, my capillaries would have burst. But yeah, you think I would have realized that because I've posted to Twitter multiple times, and that makes complete sense now.
No, it's all good.
FREYED chicken 05, right, on Twitter.
Yes.
See, I get there. I get it wrong a couple times, but three or four times into it, I learned. You can find Joe on Twitter as well at Joe Oberle. That's OBERLE. And you can find me on Twitter at VTPTSD. And keep an eye out for WolvesTerritory.com/mini-hoops. It should be around before you know it. But thanks again, man, for coming on the show. Thanks, Joe, as always, for tuning in. Thanks to all the
Josh.
beautiful people in Detroit Lakes for tuning in and for sharing and commenting on the show. It means a lot to us. We will be back next week, so stay tuned for that. But this has been the Vikings Territory Breakdown for the 6th of April. Skol.